Hi, I'm a possum and I find garbage, but I'm not talking about garbage today. Today I'm talking about Godzilla Minus One. I have no idea why it's called that, but it might be the best movie I've seen this year, which is why I'm going to try to avoid spoiling it. When I saw Godzilla Minus One in the theater, I realized I had to go to the bathroom about 30 minutes in, but I decided to hold it because this movie was wasting no time. Every minute is important. It's constantly moving forward and never gets boring. Even the scenes of people just sitting around and talking are good. You don't want to miss anything. Unfortunately, this is a foreign film, so you need to know how to read to watch it. So most of my audience probably isn't going to go see it. Instead, they'll go see the new American MonsterVerse movie, the one where Godzilla teams up with King Kong and they have to fight an even bigger monkey for some reason. I don't know, I just don't care about that franchise. I look at those movies the same way I look at those Michael Bay Transformers movies. They don't even have a so bad it's good appeal to me because they're too sterile and Hollywoodized, and they blend in with all the other big dumb CGI spectacle movies that we get dozens of every year. Yeah, I might mildly enjoy one of those in the moment, the same way I do a box of McNuggets, but I never remember it after it's over, so what am I really getting out of it? At least McNuggets have protein. Those movies are just bright colors and noise. Godzilla Minus One is not like those movies. It's much more grounded and serious. It takes place right as World War II is ending, from 1945 to 1947, which would set it before the events of the original Godzilla in 1954, but I don't think it's meant to be a prequel, but more of a remake. Much like the original movie, Godzilla is a prehistoric monster that was woken up by nuclear testing, but it's implied that he was made bigger by the mutagenic effects of radiation, even though he was already like 100 feet tall before then, and then he gets bigger over the course of the movie. It's mentioned right off the bat that he was known to the natives of the fictional Odo Island, who we never actually see in this movie, who already called him Godzilla, so that's another thing it has in common with the original. Beyond that, the movie makes no attempts to explain where Godzilla came from. For the most part, it just treats him like an inexplicable force of destruction that came from nowhere. Speaking of which, Godzilla appears really early in the movie. You know how in most movies like this there'll be some kind of build-up? Like in the 2014 American Godzilla, you see brief glimpses of him in old military footage, but then he doesn't even actually appear on screen until the midpoint. Or how in the 1998 movie, you see his claws tear through the side of a ship, and then you see a few footprints before he shows up about a third of the way in. Well, in Godzilla Minus One, he appears really abruptly and really early, with basically no build-up or fanfare. It's actually kind of shocking. A guy just points a spotlight at the beach and he's just there, like 5 minutes into the movie. It goes against all monster movie convention, but I think it actually works thematically. See, Godzilla has always been a symbol of nuclear destruction. I mean, everyone knows that. The original movie isn't even subtle about it. But no one in Hiroshima saw the bomb coming, so it's kind of appropriate that Godzilla would just show up and change everything totally unexpected. He just sort of happens without warning, and everyone has to deal with it, like an earthquake or a tsunami. The weird thing is, there's only one city-destroying scene in this movie. Yeah, that thing Godzilla movies are most stereotyped for, he only does it once. Most of the action happens at sea, where some pretty tense moments happen, and involves people trying to keep Godzilla there. The movie takes place at the end of the Second World War, and it's all told from the perspective of the Japanese. So the whole movie has this tone where everyone just feels defeated and miserable, and everyone sacrificed so much and lost everything and it was all for nothing. Then, just as everyone starts to put their lives back together, Godzilla shows up and starts stomping around and wrecking everything, and whatever's left of the Japanese military can't do anything about it, so it's up to the people to save what little they have. It's really dark, much more so than probably any other Godzilla movie we've had since the original in 1954. I think the only other Godzilla movie that comes close is Shin Godzilla in 2016, but even that one was more about how stupid and inefficient the bureaucratic government was in response to the Fukushima disaster. Most of that movie was people talking about how they have to get so-and-so to rubber stamp this, get this committee to approve that, how no one wants to make any decisions because they don't want to be responsible, and so on, all while a big lizard is knocking over buildings. On the other hand, Minus One is all about rebuilding and redeeming, and fighting for what's precious. It's a much more universal theme that crosses cultural boundaries, and anyone should be able to understand it and sympathize, regardless of where they're from. On that note, you know how Bryan Cranston was in the first 30 minutes of the American Godzilla movie from 2014, and then he died and we were stuck with some boring schmuck for the rest of the movie? Or how you can't remember what any of the human characters in any of the other MonsterVerse movies even did? Godzilla Minus One isn't like that. There's an actual protagonist and you're made to actually care about him. Koichi Shikishima is a kamikaze pilot who lied about his plane malfunctioning so he wouldn't have to crash it into an American warship. And then he ends up surviving the first Godzilla attack, causing him to have survivor's guilt. And then his arc is he has to forgive himself and get over feeling like he doesn't deserve what he has by redeeming himself in a dangerous mission to destroy Godzilla. And Godzilla himself is taken back to his roots as a scary force of destruction. He's not an anti-hero who protects humanity from other monsters, he's not a superhero, and he's not a kid-friendly goofball. He's scary again, which, as far as I'm concerned, is what he's supposed to be. And most importantly, he's used sparingly so that when he is on screen, he's much more effective. He doesn't lose his impact through overexposure. And this is only possible because we have an interesting and sympathetic protagonist to carry the movie when Godzilla isn't around. It's all taken very seriously, and there's no stupid Marvel humor. And you know what the most impressive thing about it is? It cost less than $15 million to make. Yeah, there were claims floating around the internet that it cost $15 million, but director Takashi Tamizaki says it was even less than that. I mean, some of the CGI looks kinda cheap in some places, yeah, but it looks better than most recent Marvel movies that cost literally 10 to 20 times as much. What's their excuse? Godzilla Minus One isn't the only movie that came out in 2023 that had a relatively small budget but still had production value to rival big studio films with vastly more money put into them. The creator sucked, yes, but that was mostly because it was poorly written. It still looked good with a budget of only $80 million, and the creator in Minus One just go to show that it simply isn't necessary to spend $200 to $300 million on a modern movie. And movies shouldn't cost that much because the more money you put into a movie, the fewer risks studio executives are willing to take. As a general rule of thumb, when you factor in marketing expenses and theater take, a movie has to make back at least 2 times whatever its production budget was just for the studio to break even. That's why big blockbuster movies these days are always so stupid. They're made stupid on purpose because they're designed by committee to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And they do that because when you spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a movie, it has to make hundreds of millions more to make a return on investment. Your movie has to appeal to demographic X, not alienate demographic Y, get past censors in foreign market Z, follow all of the latest trends, and a million other things. You can't take risks. You can't do new or interesting things or experiment. Everything has to be because the spreadsheet said so. Everything has to be merchandisable and tested with focus groups. All creative decisions have to be made by bean counters, and they want everything to be formulaic and bland. You don't spend $300 million on a movie to make $300,001. If you spend $300 million on a movie, it has to make $1 billion at the box office to be a success. But why does every movie have to go big? Why does every studio have to put all their eggs in one basket? If you make a movie for $10 million, it only has to make back $20 million to break even. That $300 million they're spending on one movie could be spent on 30 $10 million movies, each one with a much easier goalpost to reach. And as Godzilla Minus One proves, you don't need to spend $250 million to make a big spectacle movie. You can afford to do something riskier and more interesting. So why don't they do that? Why spend so much money on a single movie? How do they spend so much money on a single movie? Why do modern movies cost so much? Godzilla Minus One proves they don't need to. Is Hollywood just that inefficient? Another problem with modern big-budget Hollywood movies is those giant budgets are ironically the reason so many of them look so bad now. No, it's not because they're cheaping out on the VFX while over-reporting their budgets for the purposes of money laundering, embezzlement, and tax fraud. At least not all of it is. These big-budget movies that are designed by committee always undergo constant changes throughout production. When they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a movie, there's so much risk involved that executives start micromanaging everything and demanding constant changes based on whatever market research is telling them. So special effects artists keep having to redo their work and simply aren't given time to polish anything. It actually defeats the purpose of spending all that money on a big special effects driven blockbuster. They think they need that kind of money to have good special effects, but then they keep changing things according to focus group testing and won't let the VFX artists do their job. Of course, this isn't a problem with a smaller movie with a much closer goalpost to turn a profit. You have less money to spend on special effects, yes, but you also end up wasting far less of it because you have less to worry about and can just commit to whatever the plan was in the first place, and everyone can actually finish their work because the executives aren't constantly second-guessing the script. 2023 has been a record year for big-budget flops. Disney alone has lost $750 million on 13 movies this year. Warner Brothers reported a net loss of more than $400 million in just the third quarter of 2023, and you can't blame all that on the actors and writers' strikes because they've been on a losing streak since 2022. Paramount lost almost $250 million in the third quarter, and that was an improvement. This era of $100 million movies simply isn't sustainable, not when they have to compete with other forms of entertainment. It's not realistic to expect every movie to make $1 billion, but they have to if you spend hundreds of millions on them. Hollywood is digging its own grave. That's the paradox. All these major studios care about is money, which is why they're so risk-averse and keep doing things the same way over and over. But what they're doing doesn't work anymore. People are getting sick of the formula, and there's just too much competition now to keep getting away with it. Most people aren't going to go to the theater and spend $10 per person to watch yet another predictable superhero movie when they could just stay home and watch any one of thousands of movies or shows on the various streaming services that exist, or just watch YouTube or play a video game instead. The big studios have to do something different to bring audiences back, but they aren't willing to because, for whatever reason, they keep sinking too much money into these big projects to risk it all on untested ideas that might not have mass appeal. But nothing they're doing has mass appeal anymore. They just want to make everything like a Marvel movie, and that was working for a while, but not anymore. You know what? I hope this trend continues. I hope the big studios keep blowing their money on flops. I want them to fail. I want them to get desperate enough to sell all of their IPs to smaller studios. I want Hollywood to spin down the toilet. Alright, that's enough. Like this video, leave a comment for the algorithm, subscribe if you're not already, check my channel for other videos you may have missed since YouTube doesn't tell you when I upload, support me on Patreon, and send me your fan art. Bye.